Hear you, Tobin.
That's okay. I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. We can hear you now too.
Perfect.
And
Um,
we are good to go. So I will call this meeting of council to order June 7th at 5 o'clock. And I'll read our land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, and culture of the Anishinaabe, the people of the Three Fires known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi Nation, who have inhabited this land from time immemorial, and further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. We also recognize the Métis and Inuit whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. May we all, as treaty people, live with respect on this land and live in peace and friendship with all its diverse peoples. Tobin, I see you have your hand up.
yes, and it's all good. We can begin next week if that's okay with everyone, or I have a little reflection prepared for the land acknowledgement tonight if you would like to go ahead with our new format for land
So,
acknowledgements, unless I have made a mistake and we are not doing this yet.
not yet because it'll just get passed this evening
Okay,
at tonight. So
my
next week we will
apologies.
have you on
Okay,
for it, okay?
excellent. Thank you.
Okay. So then approval of the agenda or additions to the agenda. I'll read the recommendation here and then ask if there are any other additions. That the addendum to the agenda, including report CSD 2023-12 for the award of tender RFT 2023-10 Kilsyth Park and Sarawak Park Trails be approved, and that an additional closed session item be added under open meeting exemption B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, update on a staff member, and that the agenda be approved as amended. Are there any other items to be added to the agenda? Seeing none, could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Winters, Deputy Mayor Pringle. Is there any discussion? I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. If there's any declaration of pecuniary interest, it can be declared at any time throughout the meeting. Minutes of previous meetings. Recommendation that the minutes of the council meeting held on May 10th, 2023 be adopted. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Schuldeis, Councillor Thompson, is there any discussion? I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Special council minutes. That the minutes of the following special council meetings be adopted. 5.2.1 from May 3rd, 2023, 5.2.2, May 12th, 2023, and 5.2.3, May 15th, 2023. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Coburn, Councillor Schuldeis, is there any discussion? I'll call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Any announcements? Councillor Coburn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton. I'm pleased to report that we're ready to start pickleball next week, and I wish to thank staff on behalf of all of council for this initiative and moving this forward in response to the growing demand for this sport. Drop-in sessions will be between 5 and 7 p.m. and will cost $3 per person. 2 courts are now available at each location. Paddles and balls can be provided for those new to the game. Mondays are at Kemble Arena, Tuesdays at Shallow Lake, and Wednesdays at Kilsyth. Sessions start next week and will continue at Shallow Lake until Labor Day and at Kemble and Derby into the fall as weather allows. Details will be available by early next week on our website and a news release will follow. Thank you to staff.
Thank you. And I would like to add under announcements the fire ban that was issued today and is a complete and total fire ban, no cooking or warmth at all, unless, as I understand it, unless there is no other possible way for cooking that you can have anything. So just hope everybody stays safe with that. For mayor's updates, I would mention that Councillor Colbert and I attended the plaque dedication ceremony at Cobble Beach last Friday, and they have put in place 33 plaques throughout, I think it's 14 kilometers of trails at Cobble Beach. So well worth going to see and to walk that route. So a really good ceremony. Was good to see how many were there supporting that. So if anybody gets a chance, go and take a walk out there. And I attended Police Service Board conference in Niagara Falls last week. A lot of new things coming at us with going from our own police services board here to being part of that larger OPP detachment. There will be training involved, and so there's a lot of things coming. We're talking about doing some kind of training session together with Town of South Bruce Peninsula to train the two boards, and staying within quorum limits, we could have one or two more join on that as well when we do that training session. So there's a gentleman, and I forget which ministry he's with, but anyway, he's really good and everybody thinks very highly of him. So he'll come up and do the training for us. So that is all I have. Don't know if staff had any announcements? Go ahead.
Oh, I should have turned my mic off earlier. Sorry, just in regards to attendance at the Police Services Board training, do we need to worry about quorum if it's a training session?
Anytime we would have sufficient members of council together at that, it then becomes a public meeting, is my understanding. And we have to be very concerned with what would take place at that. So it's easier if we stay within the limits of, I would be there, our two police board reps, and then two more council members could join if they felt they wanted to get that. And I think our acting CAO has a comment.
Yeah, no, just a brief comment. Broadly speaking, correct. It's not that it can't happen with more than 3 members of council present, but if there are more than 3 members of council present, we would have to declare it a special council meeting and go through due process in terms of organising it. So there would be some bureaucracy associated behind the wheels and not able to be quite as agile and flexible as perhaps we would be otherwise. But if there was interest from more than 3 members of council, then certainly the clerk and I can take that away and work on that. Again, as the intention initially is to do this in partnership with another municipality, it elevates that level of complexity if it's now a special council meeting for 2 municipalities on one separate day. So it's how quickly we want to get the training down as opposed to how many want to be involved. But let's put our heads together and throw some ideas and dates out there, and we'll see what flies.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Delegations, we have none. Consent agenda. Are there any items that anyone wishes to pull from the consent agenda? Deputy Mayor Pringle?
I'd like to pull the resolutions there, 9.3.3, please.
And I would like to pull 9.3.1, sorry, 9.3.11 and 9.3.12, which both deal with tax sale proceeds. So if there's nothing else to be pulled, the recommendation that Council of the Township of Georgian Bluffs adopt the consent agenda for information as circulated, less items 9.3.3, 9.3.11, and 9.3.12, and that all actions contained herein are approved. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Scholdice, Councillor Day. Is there any discussion? I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. So we will go to 9.3.3 first. Deputy Mayor Pringle, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton. Yeah, I'd like to see the township get behind this and support this resolution moving forward. It's about Bill 23, More Homes Built Faster Act. The gist of what it says that caught my eye the most was it's therefore been resolved that via pause proposal changes to the provincial policy standards, particularly regarding natural heritage, section 4.1 in agricultural land, section 2.6 and 4.3, and really reinvest trust in the local planning authority of all 444 municipalities, recognize that each Ontario municipality has its unique landscapes, different housing needs, and offering or differing visions of local planning matters. So that was the one I really thought kind of resoluted us. We are a different area. We have our own unique area, and I thought we should maybe get behind this too. Yep.
Thank you. Is there any further comment there? For acting clerk? Do we need any further, do we need a motion on that one, or do them individually, or do all of these at the same time?
Through you, Mayor Carlton. So in the past, for resolutions that we wish to endorse or support, we've generally just done the direction to staff to forward a letter of support. And I believe that piece of correspondence was a joint, it was from the United Counties. So there's just one there.
Okay, thank you. And do I see staff maybe having a comment on that one, or no?
To you, Madam Chair? No.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then on to the 9.3.11 and 9.3.12, which are both about the tax sale proceeds. And I'm wondering if our treasurer, sorry.
Through you, Mayor Carlton, just to back up on 9.3.3, was there a direction to staff to forward a letter of support?
Sorry, I didn't follow that. That's what we needed. So do we need a motion then? Mover and a seconder? Okay. Deputy Mayor Pringle, Councillor Scholdice. Is there any further questions or discussion on that one? I will call the vote then. All in favor? That has carried. Thank you. So we will move on then with the next two. And if I could ask our treasurer to comment on those for us, please. Thank you.
Yes, so these resolutions, they refer back to the Modernizing Ontario's Municipal Act or Legislation Act, which was passed in 2017, whereby through the Municipal Act, it removed the municipality's opportunity to apply to the courts if there was a deemed forfeiture of any tax sale surplus. Now, after a period of 10 years, it is automatically vested to the Crown, whereby the township and the municipalities no longer have any right to apply for those excess funds. So a tax sale process can be very demanding on not only staff, but I'm sure council also receives questions in relation that now we have lost our opportunity to recoup some of those funds.
Thank you. So if I could have a mover and a seconder to support those resolutions, Councillor Coburn, Councillor Scholdice. Is there any questions from council? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That has carried. Thank you. Correspondence. We are now down to 11.1, the Derby Community Centre Indoor Turf Proposal. Does any member of council wish to comment regarding any of these items? Seeing none, does staff wish to comment on any of those? Okay, so we are receiving these simply for information, so we don't need a mover and seconder on this. Perfect. On to Bass Lake Access. The same. Does any, Councillor Day, go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge one voice that I've only been able to hear in passing conversation in the hallways at school from some folks who live down that way who are concerned about church dinners and the impact of the AstroTurf on their dinners that they've had there for a long time. They're all teachers who are busy with end of semester work, so they haven't been able to sit down and write a letter, but I figured that would be a voice worth adding to the conversation.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so Bass Lake Access. Does anyone wish to comment on this from council? And staff?
No, but through you, Madam Mayor, there will be an opportunity to further discuss this as there is a memo report later on in the agenda if there are questions that staff have. If council have.
Okay, so we will receive those for information as well at this point. 11.3, Doug Raycroft, the Community Schools Alliance. notice of meeting and call for nominations. Does any member of council wish to comment? Seeing none, I would like to comment here. I would put my name forth to be on this Community Schools Alliance. And my reasoning being, with the latest county growth plan that we see and see the number of where the growth is supposed to take place in the township, I would think that at some point we're going to need to see an expanded school or something done out in that area. And I'd like to have a voice in that. And I know Blue Water District School Board will have input, but I think as council, we're representing the residents, and it would be nice if we could have a comment there as well. And if we were looking at different location for schools or anything, I think we would like to have, I would like to have a comment there anyway, as well as keeping schools within our municipality keeps that community feel. I think when you lose your school in an area, you've lost a bit of the community. So if council would allow, I would like to put my name forward for that.
Yeah, I'd like to put a motion forward then for you to be able to do that. So you can use me as the first nominee.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Coburn? I will call the vote then. All in favor? Okay, thank you very much. The next item is 11.4, Grace Hall Conservation Foundation request to waive tent permit fee. Does any council member wish to comment here? Seeing none, this is an annual thing. Oh, Councillor Day has comment. Sorry, go ahead.
I think I was only going to say what you were about to say as well. I sit on the foundation committee this year, so I thought I'd speak to the event. It's on the 11th on Sunday, and it's the annual tree planting in the Memorial Forest. There's both the in the arboretum. There's also the actual forests themselves where each person gets a tree, but this is the annual ceremony for everyone who's had a tree planted within the last year. It is something we've done every year, from what I understand. I can't speak for how long, but I hope it's a simple request to approve their request for waiving the tent fee.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. So can I have a seconder on that one, please? Councillor Coburn? Any further discussion? I will call the vote. Sorry? Acting Clerk, go ahead.
Through you, Mayor Carlton, I believe our treasurer will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's a requirement here to waive your donation policy.
Okay, so
a motion could you have a mover and seconder. Just to formalize it, that donation policy FIN 01-2022 be waived, and that the request to waive the tent permit fee for the Grace Hall Conservation Foundation's annual memorial tree ceremony be granted.
Thank you. So mover and seconder, you're okay with that?
Yes.
Perfect. I will call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. 11.5, proclamation request, World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, June 15th, 2023. Do you need me to read this whole proclamation? If everybody's read it, the change that our acting clerk has made to the bottom that I would totally agree with, instead of it saying I, Sue Carlton, Mayor, it would say the Council of the Township of Georgian Bluffs. And what we would do is ask them, because they sent this as a PDF, so we can't make that change. We'll ask them to resubmit it, and then it would be signed, and we would declare June 15th as World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. So if I could have a mover and a seconder, Councillor Coburn, Councillor Schuldeis, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Committee reports. The recommendation is that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting held on May 17th, 2023 be adopted, including recommendations COW 2023-044 to COW 2023-052. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Winters, Deputy Mayor Pringle. Is there any discussion on any of those? Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton. I was absent at this committee of the whole meeting. And I did watch the recording of the meeting. I just wonder if we could discuss item 12.1.6 further. I'm not quite sure I understand the intent or what it is exactly that we're asking for. And I found the wording of the recommendation or the motion to be a little confusing. So I'm not sure, do I need to pull that from the committee of the whole?
That would be what we need to do, is pull that. We can pass the rest of them and then we can discuss that for further information. So if the mover and seconder are okay with that, we will pull that item and I will call the vote on everything else. So all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. So, sorry, I need to find my spot on here. I'm going to look to the acting clerk for, do we discuss that item now or later in the agenda? Okay, so I would suggest, Councillor Coburn, go ahead with your questions there.
So again, I just found I'm not quite sure I'm grasping the intent of the motion. I'm finding it difficult to see the point in asking staff to enter into negotiations with a private company for the use of this facility, since from what we've been told to date and looking at our master recreation plan, I think we can all acknowledge the facility is well past its best before date. I'm concerned about any recommendation that we enter into a lease for 10 years with the cost of upgrades and maintenance that we'd be placing on the taxpayers. I think it would be prohibitive. And this one for me is reminiscent of where we went wrong with the Kemble Community Center renovations. We were gung-ho and excited about an opportunity. And when we got looking at the financial impacts of it, we realized it wasn't feasible. So I guess for me, I'm not necessarily looking for more information. And perhaps I just don't understand what it is that we're asking for here in this particular motion. From a fiscal responsibility standpoint, I just think this agreement flies in the face of proper stewardship of our municipal resources. If this was a 10 or 20-year-old facility, maybe staff or my council colleagues can just let me know what the intent is of moving forward in any way with this particular agreement. Maybe I'm missing something.
Acting CAO, please go ahead.
Through you, Madam Mayor. To Councillor Coburn. So I believe, and members of council, correct me if I am incorrect, that the direction that came from committee of the whole was to go back to the proponent, talk further to them about what an agreement would look like on the basis of trying to form up that agreement, but that prior to doing that, that there be a consultation with the public, and that was a layer that was added in at committee of the whole. So, in essence, as I understood from committee of the whole, the direction was that we would go out, we would talk to members of the public, and on the basis of that conversation of engagement around the potential for future use of the Derby Arena, that would help inform a potential proposal. It may also create barriers which the proponent no longer wanted to enter into a proposal with us, and that we would then be bringing that back as a report. So there would be a proposal plus a summary of the public consultation that was done, and at that time council would be able to either agree to the proposal, amend the proposal, or reject the proposal at that point in time based on the engagement and consultation with community. So the direction that came from the committee discussion was to go that next step, but it will be coming back. It would have to come back still before council before a final decision would be rendered. But certainly it could be stopped here and now if that was the will of council.
Thank you for that, Niall. You know, I'm generally all in favor of public consultation, and I think it's a tool that is really effective when we have lots of good options before us, and we ask for the public to give their input into some choices. I'm just not sure that asking folks about this one will necessarily take into account the average ratepayer who isn't even aware that this is on the table and perhaps doesn't have a voice in terms of what this might mean to their tax dollars. So I'm still struggling to see the value in taking this forward. I would love to see more soccer opportunities and more lacrosse facilities. I'd love to see us have an indoor swimming pool. But at the end of the day, we have to look at our budget and we have to look at our master rec plan that says quite clearly to us that before we did anything to this facility, we need to have an architectural study done so that we fully understand what deficits this building has and what future costs might have to be put into it. So I'm trying to make my decision based on the information that we have. And so I'm if we get an opportunity to vote, I'm afraid I'm going to vote against this motion because I don't want staff to jump through all these hoops only for us to say in the end, we really can't afford it. We can't afford taking the risk of what it might cost us over the next 10 years. Those are just my thoughts.
Anyone else in council have comments to make there? Deputy Mayor Pringle, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Carlton. So I do agree with Councillor Colburn 100% on the way this scenario seems to be setting itself up, that we have a predetermined kind of idea of where this should go or may be going. We've all, we have our own ideas on, I guess what I see from the staff perspective is maybe there's an opportunity of something else we might be missing. Now it's a facility that has sat there for 50 years. In the last 15 years, maybe 20 years, hasn't really earned its keep. So we have to put money into it just to have the facility here. I guess, and I don't want to go 4, 5, 6 meetings into this. I want a report coming back saying if there's an opportunity for something different or a possibility of something that could happen, I would really love to see that. I'm 100% in agreement with you. What I see now, I don't like. But is there something that's missing? I would like to know for sure that we can't do anything with it. So I'll stick with that.
Thank you. If I could comment here as well, I think we've heard from people on both sides of it, both residents and non-residents, as to what they would like. So I think it would be important for us to make sure we know the full picture as to what the full use of it could be, whether it's with turf in or not in. I think we need to explore this and hear very clearly from all the public, not just the ones that have come forward in favor of it. I'd like to hear from the ones that would be affected by not being able to use it as well. And I think it's important that we do that and let the residents have their voice. So in this case, we'll need a mover and a seconder. Acting CEO, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. So I might look for a little bit of clarity. So as the direction stands at the minute, it is to consult and engage with residents, and that would be done in an open forum, and it would invite other ideas that might be in the community to come forward. But the direction ultimately is to pursue, to enter into a negotiation on this particular proposal. And so what would come back would be the results of that engagement and this proposal more fleshed out. And so where that varies slightly from the conversation we've just had is there's no direction to actually explore what other options could be there. And so, we could, for example, There could be a request for proposal put out publicly for any other private entity that might be interested in operating that facility. That's something that could be added into this at this point. The broader discussion around what this facility might be for the community, I think that's a more detailed conversation, which probably isn't within the realm of the scope of the proposal, which is before us at this point. That probably is more to the facilities review, which was sort of indicated as necessary within both the Wrekin Trails Master Plan and within the report that was brought forward at Committee of the Whole. So, I think that would be a case of perhaps voting this motion down at this point and directing staff to pursue that body of work, which would take some time. I would anticipate that is probably a 12-month plus piece of work to do that work, and then possibly coming back to this proposal if the proponent is still interested at that point in time. But that would be a departure from the motion which sits on the floor at this point in time. You would certainly get a sense from the engagement as to whether the community felt there was an alternative use for this facility that should be explored, and that would give you the opportunity to turn down the proposal ultimately at that point. But we wouldn't be actively seeking for counter proposals through what's on the floor at this point in time.
So if we stay with what's on the floor at this time, we can still be considering the proposal that's put forward, but listening to the residents and hearing from them before we decide to turn the other down fully. Is that clear for everyone, or is there other questions? So we need a mover and a seconder to move ahead with this current proposal. So if I could have a mover and a seconder. Deputy Mayor Pringle. Councillor Winters, and I will call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? I'll be in favor on this one. I'd like to see it move forward and get more information. Okay, thank you, everyone. So we are on to staff reports, 13.1 operations. So the recommendation that council approve waiving bylaw 2019-047, being a bylaw for the procurement of goods and services to all for the emergency repair of concession 14 in the amount of $78,037.50, excluding HST, to be undertaken by Walker Construction Grey Bruce, and that staff be directed to use funds in the Canada Community Building Fund, CCBF, formerly known as the Gas Tax Fund, carried forward from 2022 to support this work. Could I have a mover and seconder to put it on the floor, please? Deputy Mayor Pringle? Councillor Day? Is there any discussion? Does staff wish to speak to this one first? Sorry, did you have a comment, Councillor Winters? Go ahead.
No, I think at this point it would be preferable if staff made comments first, and then we can go from there. Thank you.
Thank you.
So through you, Mayor Carleton, very brief comments on this one. So there is a steeply sloped section on concession 14, which is a paved section of concession 14, which experienced quite significant washout, and the subsurface material, the granular material on which the pavement surface is based on, was washed out, leading to a fairly extensive section of one lane of that roadway being quite heavily damaged and potholed. It's beyond simple pothole repair. What needs to happen is the asphalt surface needs to be peeled up across a section of that roadway, the granular material in the base of the road rebuilt, and then an asphalt surface re-poured on top of it. And so that's what staff have approached, are seeking support to achieve through this. The reason that we've approached Walker is Walker have already been awarded a tender in the area. We'll have the equipment and materials and personnel on site. And so we've moved quickly to try and secure somebody that would be able to do this work and effect those repairs in this financial year and operation year.
Thank you. Councillor Winters, go ahead.
Thank you. Not being overly critical on this. I mean, it is a secondary road within Georgian Bluffs. It's not a highly traveled section of road. This damage happened back in March. And there was a time back in the day when operations staff would have gone out with their own backhoes, their own stuff, and put that road back into service, probably with a sign that said, transition from asphalt to gravel surface, and it would be put into a surface treatment program. I can't make a decision on this because I really don't have the information of what Walker's going to do for us. A typical road in Georgian Bluffs doesn't have a very suitable base under it anywhere. And if we're going to make this hill the best road base in Georgian Bluffs, I'm a little concerned about that for the amount of traffic it gets. What pavement surface is Walker proposing on this section of road? Is it again a surface treatment, double surface, or are we going to that recycled asphalt product?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Winters, my learning curve on road terminology and infrastructure is a rapid and steep one. My understanding is, I'll answer. There were a couple of questions in there. So the first one is we've actually benefited in this instance from having the road flooded out very nearby. And so we've had even less traffic than we would normally have on this section of road due to the fact you can't get past it a little bit further on. So there is, I believe, only one property, and I think it's just a workshop actually, that is on the wrong side of this impacted section of asphalt. So we have been able to get by. We are in the process of reopening concession 14 over coming days, and so we are going to effect a temporary repair by our own crews in the short term, so that we actually make that road more passable for traffic once we've reopened it due to the flooding further down. As I understand it, the proposal for Walker here is not similar to the proposal you're going to see next. They are doing a hot surface. I think it's an HL4 that they're putting on the top of this. So they are going to scrape it back, rebuild the base to the standard that it was previously. So it's not going to be the best road in the township by any stretch of the imagination, but they're going to rebuild the base sufficient enough to be able to sustain the surface, the hot pour surface, the new surface they will be pouring onto it. They will be also adding some drainage to make sure that this issue does not reappear next winter.
I mean, I understand the situation, right? We've had some issues with staff and everything. In the essence of time, I support getting it done. I'm not happy with the way that we're doing it because it should have been done by now. And I really do struggle with asphalt patches in the middle of a road that is surface treated because the transition between those two surfaces will always cause us issues. We likely on that road, there's probably 8 to 10 inches of gravel. Walker will go in typically as a road construction and put 18 inches. Those roads will move and heave at different rates in the wintertime. It's always been a concern. That's why I was a little concerned that we're going to spend as much as we are on it. But in the essence of time, I think it needs to be done. If we put it off now, we're not going to see it done this year. I do agree with that, but we'll have more conversations on concession 14 here coming up.
Thank you. Councillor Scholz, go ahead.
Sorry, now can I just confirm with you what part of the road is actually going to be worked on, or like what part are they proposing on concession 14?
So it's the paved section to the it's the west side of it is a paved section. We did actually look, to Councillor Winters' point, this is very close to the intersection between a paved part of the roadway and the unpaved part of the roadway. This is not quite at the end of the paved section. So this is a patch between two paved sections close to the transition to a granular section. And we did explore the opportunity to actually redo more of the road, but that would have driven the costs quite significantly higher. So this is on the paved section towards the west end of the road.
That answer your question? Okay. Any further questions or comments? I have a mover and a seconder, don't I? Thank you. So if there's no further discussion, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. On to the next item, which is the extension of scope of works for concession 24 and concession 17. So the recommendation is that council approve waiving bylaw 2019-047, being a bylaw for the procurement of goods and services, to allow for an amendment to the scope of work on concessions 24 and 17 in the amount of $126,412, excluding HST, to be completed by Walker Construction, Grey Bruce, and that staff be directed to use funds in the Canada Community Building Fund, CCBF, formerly known as the Gas Tax Fund, carried forward from 2022 to support this work. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Thompson? Councillor Schuldeis? I will look to staff for an update on what this is about.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I will keep my comments on this one equally brief. So in essence, the tender was awarded through a competitive process earlier on this year. In conversation with Walker, they have proposed an alternative surface treatment on this section of road on the basis that for a proportionally small additional extra cost, we can extend the lifespan of the work that they are doing on both concessions 24 and 17 quite significantly. And so they wanted to share with us an alternative way of delivering that body of work. That's what this report responds to. So the tender has been awarded as per the specifications that we laid out. Walker essentially indicating they believe that with an amended specification, they would be able to extend the lifespan of the road. And on a $1 per year basis, $1 per year per kilometer basis, it is better value to do it this way than to do it the way that we had suggested in the original specification.
Thank you. Councillor Winters, go ahead.
You knew I was going to have questions. Again, I want to get to where council gets to a position where we know that we have all the facts in front of us. And when we saw the original Walker report, we didn't really know what that specification was. I'm assuming that I think I know what it is, and that somewhere over time, staff within Georgian Bluffs have changed the construction specification to go to an asphalt pulverization, application of a calcium chloride prior to the application of surface treatment, which was wrong because the calcium chloride eats the emulsion in asphalt surface treatment. So somewhere along the lines, we've migrated off the path. To get back on the path, we've now migrated to a more expensive area, which I think is a great idea in more urban areas. But I think as Georgian Bluffs and as a council, we're not doing our constituents proud because we're doing less and less roads. And as I mentioned during budget, we are nowhere near keeping up with our road conditions. We're losing ground here. Again, I still have to look at the timing here, that if we go back out to tender, you're going to miss this construction season. Asphalt and surface treatment has to be done in July and August. If we wait till September, it's too late. So I'm not impressed that we're doing it this way. I think there was another way to do it. And I think getting rid of the calcium chloride, pulverizing a road, adding gravel with our own forces, and shaping like we used to, we could have covered a lot more ground than we're covering today. But again, in the essence of time, I think we need to move it forward. But I don't want to have this conversation next year. I think it's wrong. And I think, it's an embarrassment as a council that we're doing less and less roads than we normally did.
Thank you. Any comments from anyone else on council? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Day, go ahead.
Thank you. There's always a little bit of a delay on my end. My
Yes.
internet's not super fast. I did want to acknowledge that I appreciate the consideration of this option. I think that doing things well the first time so they last longer is a good philosophy, and I would like to continue to see that philosophy used in all aspects of Georgian Bluffs.
Thank you. Any other acting CEO, please go ahead.
Yeah, just very, very quickly through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Winter's comments. I think you're quite accurate. And I think that this is not the right way of doing it. I think what this process has clearly highlighted is we need to revisit the specification that we use. And I think that's something that staff have come very clearly to appreciate through this process. And I think your comments are well suited. So my hope would be is that we're able to move quickly to amend our specification to a township appropriate specification. And that is what we use on a go forward basis.
Thank you. So I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. I have to allow for this little delay between here in chambers and virtual. So we are through to 13.2, Human Resources, CAO Recruitment Timeline. So the recommendation is that Council of Township of Georgian Bluffs receive report HR 2023-07 for information, and that council approve the timeline as outlined in this report for filling the CAO vacancy, and hereby direct staff to carry out the necessary administrative actions to schedule and hold the special council meetings outlined in this report. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Shouldice and Councillor Coburn. I will turn it over to staff to speak to this.
Thank you very much. Quick overview of this report before you is a proposed timeline. You are, as council, the recruitment committee for the CAO. So before you, I've laid out priorities for each proposed special council meeting, that they would all be special council, and you have the decisions to move things around. So I will put it back to you now.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion from council? Okay, seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? Councillor Day. You're muted.
I believe there was an option A and an option B for interviews. I don't know if we want to look at that now, or if that's a conversation we want to save until the fall, in terms of I believe it was the first round of interviews for the CAO.
Crystal?
I would suggest we make that final decision at our very first meeting, when that's all we're talking about. And then you have your job description and you have your priorities all laid out, and then we can look at option A and option B, but before you are this proposed times.
Great, thank you. That makes sense.
Okay, thank you. So I will call the vote. All in favor then? That is carried. Thank you. Community Services. Recommendation that council hereby approve the awarding of the tender RFT 2023-10 new pedestrian trails, Kilsyth Park and Sarawak Park, to RF King Holdings at the tendered price of $143,741.65, excluding HST, to be completed by October 27th, 2023. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Deputy Mayor Pringle. Councillor Day. Is there any discussion, or does staff wish to speak to this? Questions from council? I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. We are on to bylaws. The nuisance bylaw. The recommendation is that bylaw 2023-025, being a bylaw to prohibit or regulate public nuisances within the township of Georgian Bluffs, be read a first, second, and third time, finally passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed with the seal of the corporation, and engrossed in the bylaw book. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Coburn, Councillor Thompson. Is there any discussion? Councillor Coburn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton. I think a quick and easy question, likely for Mr. Lewis, if you don't mind. I just wonder which municipalities, have we based this upon another municipality's existing nuisance bylaw? And which one would that be?
We did base it on a couple. Minto was one of them. So, yeah, one was Minto. And Brampton. Yeah.
Okay. I was just curious. Thank you. I was reading Grey Highlands, the municipality of Grey Highlands. They're also developing this bylaw newly right now and seeking some public consultation into that. And I noted that they said in their bylaw that they had theirs based on Kincardines. So I just thought it's kind of handy to know which ones we're basing ours on, so we can maybe read the sources of those and see how it might be different or crafted differently.
I guess from a staff standpoint, we kind of gravitate to what works, and you're familiar with, so that's kind of the basis for it.
Okay, if there's no further questions, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. 2023 tax rate. The recommendation that bylaw 2023-033 being a bylaw to establish and levy tax rates for the Township of Georgian Bluffs purposes. Confirm the County of Grey and school board rates for the year 2023, provide for penalty and interest in default of payment thereof, establish alternative installments and due dates, and to repeal bylaw 2022-031 be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed with the seal of the corporation, and engrossed in the bylaw book. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Schuldeis? Deputy Mayor Pringle? Is there any discussion? I will call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. I note we've lost Councillor Thompson on there now. The next bylaw being Property Standards Committee appointments. The recommendation that bylaw 2023-034 being a bylaw to establish a Property Standards Committee to appoint members to the Property Standards Committee and repeal bylaw 2019-019 be read a first, second, and third time, finally passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed with the seal of the corporation, and engrossed in the bylaw book. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Winters, Councillor Schuldeis, is there any discussion? I will call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. There is no unfinished business. New business. 16.1, reconsideration of Bass Lake public access. My note says see attached memo report with background information. Okay. Who is speaking to this one then, please?
To you, Madam Mayor, that would be me again. I think the next couple of meetings are going to be quite heavily dominated with reports with my name at the top. Yes, so the reconsideration was brought forward, a motion to reconsider was brought forward at the last council meeting, and there was a request for background information to be prepared and shared. So the memo that has been shared as part of the agenda package this evening presents that information. I think I tried in pulling this together to dig back through various different committee reports and council resolutions to try and build up the picture and read the various correspondence on this file. I think it's not entirely clear when you start digging back through this exactly what did and didn't happen at various different points in time. And indeed, I think the conclusion that we ultimately got to is a conclusion which is perhaps not the understanding that the general public has, and perhaps also not the understanding that council had as a result of the conversations that were held. So in essence, there are three accesses that access Bass Lake on that side of the lake. There is an unopened road allowance, and then there are two 20 feet wide easements or accesses that were deeded to the township. There is one road allowance, two accesses on that side of the lake. There were at some point, we understand, built structures on the two accesses to access down to the lake. Both accesses encounter a fairly steep drop off to get down to the lake shore and the shoreline allowance around Bass Lake. As we understand it, there were sets of steps on both of those two accesses at some point in time. We know there definitely were on the one at the far end of Lakeview, because we know that at some point in time council directed staff to go in and repair those steps on the basis of an inspection that determined they were becoming a concern for public use. And so staff have at some point in time repaired those steps. We are not entirely clear. I was not able to ascertain from the material, and I recognize that I have been here for 6 months, and so there may well be memories around council and the horseshoe which are significantly different to this, but I was not able to ascertain who put both sets of steps in. I was only able to ascertain that we did work on one, and obviously by working on it, we would have assumed some responsibility for it at that point in time. A number of years later, there was an inspection by our then chief building official, who raised concerns about the set of steps at the end of Lakeview. And as a result of a report from him, staff were directed. It did take some period of time between them being identified as a concern and the direction being received to remove them, and a period of some years, I think, in that instance. But staff were then directed to remove that set of steps. There was not a direction about the potential of the other set of steps that we understand was there, and I'm fairly confident they were there, because I've been onto the access, and there is a set of steps on the access that have clearly been dismantled, but they are still there. And so there was a set of steps on that secondary access, but there's no evidence that the township, was involved in their construction or in any maintenance activities that was undertaken on them. Some years after the second set of steps was removed, and as I assume at this point, there were then no steps on either of those two accesses, there was a request made to close up the accesses. As I understand it from looking at the correspondence, that request resulted from the concerns of neighbouring property owners who, as a result of there no longer being steps down the cliff, were experiencing trespass from people trying to access the former landing points, if you like, down on the shoreline road allowance. And so there was a concern by those residents that people were straying onto their properties to get down these accesses, and so therefore could they be closed off. There was a recommendation made by staff at that time that these be closed off. There was a counter recommendation put on the floor, which was to close them up and discharge responsibility, convey ownership. It's not clear who the ownership conveyance would be to, but there was a counter motion put on the floor to convey the accesses to someone. That motion was defeated. And then there was a contrary motion put on the floor to leave it as is and walk away. And that motion was supported. So in actuality, these two accesses remain open at this point in time, albeit that they cannot actually be accessed because there is no infrastructure on those two accesses to provide the access to the lakeshore. So the only way to scramble down that cliff in either instance would be to move down onto neighbouring properties. So there was a motion to reconsider that was placed on the floor. The motion to reconsider, if it was is to reconsider, but I think it was to reconsider the closure. But in fact, the motion as it stands now is to reconsider the opening of those two accesses. In essence, both results are the same, is that staff would have to bring back a report ultimately and a subsequent recommendation, which would then be put before council. I hope I haven't made the issue even more confusing in the last 5 minutes than it was trying to dig through it, but that's where we stand at this point in time.
Thank you. Councillor Scholdes, go ahead.
I have spent a lot of time the last week or so emailing back and forth with homeowners of the waterfront properties neighboring this, even phone calling back and forth. I definitely have to echo what they're saying. They don't support the idea of it. I don't support the idea of a public access there. I wouldn't support reconsidering it. Just putting that forward. I don't support this.
So you, Mayor Carlton, so just to confirm, those accesses are currently open to the public as of this point in time. So if the motion is defeated and there is no reconsideration, the accesses will remain as they are today, open to the public, just with no infrastructure on them.
Go ahead.
Let me reiterate that. Sorry. I don't support reconstructing anything. I don't think we should have a public boat access there. Whatever Courtney Sprout is suggesting, I don't support it. Period.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Coburn and then Deputy Mayor Pringle.
So I find this one to be one of those gray areas where, for me, there's not really a clear answer. I wish for people to have access to a lake that they have chosen to live near. But at the same time, I'm not quite sure how risky or costly putting the infrastructure into those two access points would be in order to ensure accessibility. That's my concern, the risk and the cost. Similarly, I have concerns about entering into a deal with a private property owner, allowing use of that property for access. I think my concern is that that could result in a host of headaches down the road with nuisance complaints. So long story short, I don't have any answers to this one. I think it's unfortunate and it's difficult, but I'm happy to have staff take a look at it and bring a report back, but I'm not hopeful that we're going to find a solution that's risk-free and not cost prohibitive.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Pringle, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton. I guess my question now is, with the way it is out there now of being open, and we go out there, or I go out there and I fall down that cliff, who am I coming after?
So through you, Madam Mayor, as with any piece of municipal property, the theory would be that you could pursue the township. Having said that, there is a very clear and visible natural hazard, and so our defence in that issue would be extraordinarily strong. In that, if you choose to walk off a cliff and that cliff is very clearly apparent, we haven't done anything to create that cliff. We haven't done anything to exacerbate the risk of that cliff. Ultimately, there is a significant proportion of your the responsibility which would be laid on the individual for having made the choice to walk off a cliff. So yes, we do have some liability. I admit that the liability on this one, I suspect, is fairly slim because there is no infrastructure on that site at this point in time, no active encouragement at this point in time to try and access the water down those two accesses.
Thanks for the clarification on that. Yeah, I'm kind of same on this as Councillor Colburn. Usually you buy a lake property to have access to get to a lake, but that's clearly been not defined real clearly anymore as to what goes on. And obviously you got both sides of the coin here with people that want it open and don't want it open. I'm also the same. I'm not 100% sure what direction we really should go with this. So obviously this has been going on a long time, and yeah, I still think I need more information.
Thank you. Councillor Day, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you. Question for CAO Lobley. Are there consequences beyond liability that we should think about in terms of having trail or water access road allowance that's open but not accessible? I don't know. I don't know if there's other considerations that I should be thinking of in this really complicated issue. So I'll leave it there for now.
So through you, Madam Mayor, Councillor Day. No, I don't think there are too many issues. I mean, not that I like to oversimplify things, but sometimes I do. And on this instance, I might take the simple approach is that actually council has a fairly simple decision today. The accesses are currently open with no infrastructure on them. If council wish to just leave them as are, then the motion to reconsider would be defeated. If the motion to reconsider is supported, then staff would go away and undertake to try and answer some of the questions like Deputy Mayor Pringle has raised, Councillor Coburn has raised around the cost, the potential risks, the alternative ways in which it might be explored. But at this point in time, we would need the motion to reconsider to be successful in order for us to bring forward a recommendation either to close or to do something to facilitate access in some way, shape or form on there. So the decision tonight is actually a simple one. The one to come might be far more complicated. If the motion to reconsider is defeated, they remain open. If the motion is supported, then we can consider other options, and staff would bring back what I anticipate to be a fairly comprehensive report with robust local engagement and consultation, and hopefully a number of different potential recommendations or solutions that council might wish to consider.
Thank you. Councillor Winters, go ahead.
I think there's only two options available for that piece of property. One, we as councillors don't know what the intent of those two 10 or 20-foot wide right-of-ways were, whether that was water line access, utility access, or actually dedicated for public access for the lake. The topography says it's not for public access. Leaving it as is, I support. I don't support putting any money in there from township. I support looking after limiting our liability. The only thing I really would support is if the residents fronting on Lakeview as a collective group came to us with full support and said, we'd like you to stop it up, close it, and deed it to every one of us so that we as a group, they as a group, can work at their own access, reducing the liability for the municipality. I'd be interested in what their response was when you threw it to them and said, it's yours, you're liable, you decide what you're going to do. Not losing the fact that it is all regulated by the Niagara Escarpment Commission, and anything that they would do or could do there would require permits, stairs, safety, EIS studies, a little bit. But it is not a safe open access point for anybody. And allowing it, I think we open ourselves up for huge liability.
Thank you. Question that I would have then. So are we positive, and I think we've explored this before as council, if I remember correctly, whether anyone actually has deeded access on their properties that are on the backside of that would be one question. Is it a true public access, or were those accesses only intended to be for the people in that little subdivision, so to speak? In which case, should we simply facilitate a meeting of all the residents there to find out what collectively they might do as an organization to look after that on their own and take that onus off of the township? So I'll turn it back to the CAO.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think the first question is, I am as sure as I can be that we haven't been able to identify why we were given those in the first place. We were given them. They are municipal property. They are ours. There's no, usually easements of that sort of nature are deeded to us because we're putting drainage infrastructure, or we own some piece of infrastructure, or we have a potential for putting a piece of infrastructure under that property in the future, and we retain the ownership for that purpose. I've not been able to identify that that was ever an issue in this instance, and indeed, looking at the topography and the nature of the development, I can't imagine that that would ever have been an issue in this area. So we're not sure. I would agree with Councillor Winters that if the intent was for public access, this was not ideal property to take for public access. I mean, both are difficult, if not impossible, to navigate. So I don't know what the intent was of receiving them. To our knowledge, there is nothing on our records that would suggest that there is a deed given to anyone to access over those. So at this point in time, and again, the only way of actually confirming that would be to look at the deeds of everybody who could possibly have that. And that might be one of the pieces of work we have to do in terms of taking this one forward. It's just to clarify that there are no deeds from, and I suspect it would be the residents on the non-lake side of Lakeview that would potentially have that deeded access. But we are not aware and not had anyone share a deed. We are aware that there are a number of residents that bought property on the realtor advice that they had deeded access, which is not uncommon in the township, and then discovered that the deeded access they were promised isn't in fact deeded at all. And so we are aware that there are residents that purchased property believing there to be a deeded access and then discovered there wasn't one that they could evidently find. So I think did I cover all your questions at that point? And just to confirm to Councillor Winters, the access is currently open. So if we did want to pursue with a potential closure of it, we would actually have to support the motion to reconsider this evening to allow staff to bring that recommendation potentially forward at a later date.
Councillor Shoulders, go ahead.
I have to collect my thoughts here. There's been a lot over the last couple minutes, but full support with what Councillor Winters had said a minute ago. I don't support infrastructure being put in down there. I think it increases our liability as a municipality. I have to say it again, the emails I've sent back and forth with neighboring property owners there, the phone calls that I've spent the time with last week or so with them, I have to echo with their complaints. I support them for sure. Wholeheartedly, I support them. I would support a closure of that facility. I think I also would support facilitating them coming here, speaking to us just like what you said a minute ago. Anyways, just wanted to show support to the local homeowners there, and that I would support closure of that facility.
So I think the only other comment there, and Isaac kind of alluded to it, is facilitating a meeting of all of the property owners affected there. Because if there were some way of turning that over, those two sections especially, over to the property owners for them to look after, for them to control, that would take it out of our possession and put it over to them if that were possible. And if they were willing to look after that, is the only suggestion I would have. Otherwise, we're sitting in the same boat and this is going to keep coming back at us every 4 or 5 years. So
through you, Mayor Carlton, whilst there has not been any work done on the potential future for these, because we have to wait for this evening's vote before we can do that, certainly one of the options, there are a host of options that could see these provide access to residents of Lakeview, to South Bass Lake, to anyone that lived around Bass Lake, that would not involve any additional liability exposure by the municipality, or expense by the municipality. So there are certainly options that could be considered that would facilitate access over those areas in a way which would not be public, but could be retained to those owners and would not necessitate the township conveying any property to achieve that. So there are a host of options that could be considered if we are directed to reconsider the issue this evening.
So we don't actually have a motion on the floor at this point. Just a minute, Tobin. Staff are just discussing here, and then I'll call on you and then Councillor Coburn. Can I go to Councillor Day? And okay, Councillor Day, you go first, and then Councillor Coburn.
I just wanted to comment that in one of the letters, and I'm sorry I can't remember exactly which one it was, there was reference to a September meeting that the Lakeview Drive residents hold, because I believe their road is private and shared already, if I'm remembering correctly. So they do have a forum for gathering and talking about community issues, which seems like an ideal point to, or an ideal place to talk about lake access for the folks who aren't on the shoreline side of the road. And I think I would like the issue to be talked about more, or go forward with a report, so that, I don't know, I suppose we could say that the final decision was made 4 years ago. But if we were able to grant access, like take ourselves out of the picture and have that community get together and create their own shoreline access, that does seem like a kind and reasonable thing to do for those folks who live really close to a lake but can't get down to the water. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn?
Yeah, thank you. Similar to what Councillor Day just said, I'm not sure what the municipality's role is in facilitating this. Unless it's our property and our infrastructure, I'm not entirely sure if there's a role for our staff there when they're already overextended. I'm quite happy to encourage talk amongst those folks to do some problem solving and find some solutions. I'll ask our CAO to comment, but I just want to make sure we're not overstepping in our role as a municipality here in facilitating or helping to conduct meetings that might find a solution that doesn't actually involve the municipality.
So through you, Madam Mayor, to both Councillor Day and Coburn, so it's a public road. That is not a private road that runs up through Lakeview. It terminates actually at the well, doesn't really terminate. It turns into South Bass Lake Road at the upper of the two accesses. I think the unfortunate reality is it's our property. And so so ultimately, that's what brings it back to the municipality. If this was not our property, we would certainly be able to walk away from it without any shadow of a doubt. But it is our property at this point in time, and so that gives us a cause to be at the table at least. My hope would be that if there was an intention to explore potential other avenues beyond the municipality doing it, that would be something that staff would be able to, hopefully push a snowball down, and then let that snowball gather size and speed and momentum without staff necessarily needing to gather that. And I think if I'm reading between the lines of council, I'm understanding council is not necessarily adverse to the accesses being accesses, as long as the municipality has nothing to do with them. And so that might be a good way for us starting that community conversation, and then leaving it with the community with some time to stew over, talk amongst themselves, and see whether that's something they might like to entertain. So I think, unless I'm misreading the words of council, I think that might be the first next step, and we can certainly look at how to achieve that with minimal staff impact.
Thank you. And I think our acting clerk has a motion for us to consider.
Sorry about that, through you, Mayor Carlton. So first of all, we need to vote on the reconsideration itself. So whether or not we're going to entertain reconsidering the decision. So just gathering the discussion here, this would resolve whether or not we're going to reconsider the motion, and then it would provide direction to staff to bring back further information. So if I may, a proposed motion would read that resolution COW 2019-003 be reconsidered, and that staff be directed to bring back further information and recommendations following engagement with residents.
Okay, is everyone okay with that? Could I have a mover and a seconder then, please? Deputy Mayor Pringle, Councillor Coburn. There's no further discussion. I will call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. And before we move on to 16.2, it occurred to me that I missed item 7, public hearings. Or do we not have normally a public question period on our agendas? Have I passed it? Oh, okay. I read it. Okay. I guess I didn't ask if our members of the public wish to speak, which is what brought it up. Just come to the podium and speak there just so others can hear you. Sorry.
Just a quick procedural matter. If you wish to open the floor up to delegation, you need to waive your procedure bylaw very quickly.
So that's why I was thinking we had a public question period section on our agenda still that allowed the public to speak.
Through you, Mayor Carlton, correct, but there is a 3 p.m. registration deadline and we did not receive any, so you'll still have to waive the procedure bylaw.
Okay. So Councillor Coburn moves that. Could I have a seconder? Deputy Mayor Pringle? Go ahead.
You may not need to do this. After having just spoken to the member of the public in the audience, then they're quite happy to wait. They are interested in an item yet to come and don't necessarily want to speak. They are just interested in a conversation which is yet to happen.
Okay, good. Councillor Coburn.
So I'm confused as to why we don't have public question period on our agendas. This is not the time for that discussion, but can we bring that back?
Yeah, let's bring that back because we always had that. So, okay. Sorry for confusing things.
Through you, Mayor Carlton, we do actually have public question period. Item 8 is delegations / public question period. It was just left off this agenda as a administrative error, but public question, sorry. Oh, that was really loud.
Yeah.
Public question period has not gone away. It just has that 3 p.m. deadline to allow for questions to be submitted in advance so that staff and or council can come prepared with answers for the public to improve their experience.
Go ahead.
So I have had some feedback on this matter from members of the public. If folks want to come and listen to the content and the discussion of a meeting, I really feel that it's important that they have an opportunity to ask a question in the moment. They can't anticipate by 3 p.m. What questions they might have before they've actually heard the discussions. So again, not to interrupt our agenda too much with this, but maybe we could come back to this another time.
Go ahead now.
Again, at risk of us freewheeling off the agenda briefly, because it's not full enough, but at risk of that. So just so that I'm absolutely clear. So Councillor Coburn, are you suggesting that rather than having a public question period, we should be opening every item up so that a member of the public can sit, join in and listen and have a question at any point during the agenda?
So in the past, and that's a very good point, in the past, we have had a designated spot on the agenda for public question period. The complaints that I've heard is that it was so early in the agenda that the meat of the meeting hadn't been discussed before people were asking to post their questions. So if it could perhaps come, I'm thinking folks might like it later in the agenda, but it will mean then going back to ask questions about things that have been discussed previously. So it's problematic for sure.
Yeah, so through you again, Madam Mayor, so that does become problematic because usually what that will be is that would happen after council has voted on something. So, and once voted, that would then potentially enter into a reconsideration. So the purpose of putting a public question period at the start of the meeting is that then members of the public are able to see all the matters that are going to be discussed. They can raise any question at that point on any of those matters in advance. And generally speaking, we also try, I appreciate that this evening, it's not necessarily happened in all instances, but we try that most business will be discussed at committee of the whole first. So members of the public will be able to see the initial conversation, get a sense for where council's heads are at, decide whether or not they'd like to ask a question. Then they can come ask a question before council makes the final decision on any item at the council meeting. So we can provide some greater clarity on the agenda and perhaps provide some greater information on our website, for example, on how public can engage with council and staff in the decision-making process without necessarily having to rejig the agenda massively. But we can make it clearer that the delegation period allows for, we can be clearer perhaps on the process by which decisions are made and how people can get involved in that decision-making process. And I'd be happy to bring back a short report on that to council so that members of the public are able to see that and have that shared in a council forum. It would be a for information item. It wouldn't take very long to do.
Yeah, I don't wish to make any more work for you, Niall. So yeah, if it could just be a verbal, that would be terrific. Thank you.
And thank you, and I apologize for derailing things here.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's your right. You're the chair.
Okay. 16.2, various projects updates. Who is speaking to this first?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Surprise, surprise. So I might rely on my colleagues to help furnish the answers on some of this. I'm just trying to get to the question so I can go through this. And I might rely on Councillor Winters to to direct me if I'm not addressing the questions and the intent that you had. But I'll go through the list and perhaps pause after each one, and then we can take it from there. So Francis Drive completion. So having dug into this one a little bit, as I understand it, this was a request that Francis Drive be municipally assumed and maintained. It is a municipal right of way. It is a road allowance on which there is a travelled portion, a travelled route. And so staff are in the process of going through that, implementing the direction that was received, which is to open that roadway. So the roadway has been surveyed. So the unopened road, the road allowance has now been surveyed. We have identified a number of areas of challenge along that road allowance where the travelled portion of the road meanders quite extensively across the road allowance, which means that in order to maintain the roadway, we would be impacting what people perceive to be their private property in several instances. And indeed, there is some private infrastructure which may actually just be inside the allowance. If it's not inside the allowance, it is right on the edge of the allowance in the way of well vaults and so on and so forth. So there is some work that needs to be done. We are in the process of working with the surveyor to see whether the travelled roadway is contained within the existing road allowance, and whether we might be able to take an approach which would be a non-traditional assumption. So rather than trying to build something which is a traditional road through there, whether we were able to assume essentially the maintenance of the roadway as it exists, even though it is not centered on the right of way or anything along those sorts of lines. So we are working on it, and the intention is to follow through on the direction and to take that into municipal maintenance.
Councillor Winters, go ahead.
Thank you, Niall. This goes back to about 2018, 2019, when the residents requested that the municipality take over the assumption and maintenance of the municipally owned property. I was involved back in the day. The road has been installed. The township went in, they trimmed trees, they put the gravel in, the whole bit. My concern is I think majority of the residents are happy with what's happened. I don't think we're into reconstructing a road. I don't think we're into realigning a road. We need to finish the road. And when I say finish, we can't even take our roadside mower down there and trim the weeds on the side because we haven't done any grading on the side slopes of the road. And I think it's very easily done. I think we own the equipment to do it. We have the wheeled excavator. We have the excess materials from ditching operations throughout the municipality. A little bit of forethought, we could go in there and move material from one side of the road to the other. We could properly shape. We could put some topsoil down. Not only would the residents think that the road was completed, we'd be able to maintain it with our own forces. We are plowing the road, and I believe we have assumed it by bylaw. So when I brought that up, that the residents have been contacting me and saying, okay, enough's enough. It's been 4 years. There's been some staff change. I respect that. They respect that. But let's move forward. Let's finish it. We have the resources. It's not a huge budget item. It's just a matter of organization. When I look back at the operation of the municipality last year, we took all the excess material that we took out of ditching and we stockpiled it at our landfill. But there's situations like this throughout the municipality that could easily be utilized. We're taking material from one side of the road allowance, putting it on the other, a little bit of topsoil. I think the residents would probably stand up and put some grass seed down for us if we made it where they could actually use it and maintain it. I'm shocked our plow hasn't gone off the side of the road. It's fairly steep on the west side of it, just as you come up in section 14. Those are the things when I brought this up, that's what I wanted to discuss. We don't need to make it any bigger than what it is. We just need to finish it.
Yeah, so through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Winters, you're quite correct. We don't believe that this is a significant body of work. The challenge that we've encountered is that there are places where the travelled portion of the road is incredibly tight to the road allowance, and so to create those shoulders and undertake some of that shoulder work, we're in final stages of just confirming, but we don't think there's space. So there may be individual properties, there may be areas where we have to realign the road to create some of that space to allow us to do that, but we're on the same page as
you. And from what I've seen, I stayed away from the first couple of years because I was embarrassed at the quality of the work and where it stood. Recently, when I've been down there, it's more or less the section just off of concession 14. It's the steeper section, and I can see the visual survey boundaries there, and there is opportunity for the municipality to make that correct.
Again, at this point in time, we are waiting. I think we're still waiting on, we have the survey back. Survey has been completed. We have the paper survey of the road allowance. We're waiting for the overlay of the existing traveled portion of the road. And then, as you say, the intention is to do the work that's required for us to take that into a more routine and robust maintenance program. Currently, I am told that we've had that work done, and I will have that overlay next week. So that should allow us to move forward on the next step.
So completion by the end of August?
I will take the 5th on that one. Okay. Shall I move on to the next one? So the next one is concession 14 and the road closure impacts. Staff have been in touch with the neighbouring landowner and in touch with a beaver expert, local beaver expert in the area. Trapping is being undertaken at this point in time. It's trapping being undertaken privately, not by the municipality, of beavers. There are plans afoot to breach some of the dams to drain the water down that was overtopping concession 14. As the water has subsided, one of the upsides of our current dry season is we have seen that water level drop quite significantly. The two culverts, there are two culverts under that roadway. Those two culverts were completely plugged. And so the opportunity while we've had the road closed, we pulled those two culverts out and replacing those two culverts with new culverts. Bringing the gravel that's washed off to the sides back in to rebuild the road up. We will be doing a surface treatment in there. The anticipation is that that roadway will hopefully be reopened to traffic later on this week in that section. If not this week, it would be next week that roadway would be opened up and it would be able to be traveled again while the work is going on to address the beavers to try and prevent that from occurring again. Beavers are pesky little critters, so I wouldn't like to promise this is never going to happen again, but we are doing all we can to try and eliminate the chances of it happening again.
Councillor Shouldice, you have a comment?
I couldn't help but ask, did we contract a trapper? Is that, no, just a private person did it?
We do, through you, Mayor Carlton, to Councillor Shouldice, we do from time to time contract out a trapper. We did not need to in this instance. Somebody decided to take it on of their own accord.
Didn't know that we would do that in the past. That's news for me. So, okay, thanks.
I believe Mr. Lewis has something to add.
And in addition to that, we did, as far as opening up the beaver dams, want to make sure that we're on the right side of things. So we got a legal opinion on that today about dealing with, sometimes landowners don't want you going on their property and opening up beaver dams. And we were looking at it from the perspective of the municipality, do we have a right to protect our road, our asset and stuff? So we got a legal opinion on it today and it looks like it's in our favor. So.
Thank you. And Councillor Winters, go ahead.
No, and thank you, Niall. I mean, the reason for me bringing this up was, I was afraid as a local in the area and a councillor that this was one of the roads that we were just turning a blind eye to. And there were ways to keep this road open, right? And traditionally in the history, we had a roads employee that lived in the area. He was very knowledgeable of where those dams were. The township forces did go in and do that. And actually, to Councillor Shouldice's question, the municipality has contracted different times a licensed trapper. It's more effective to pay a licensed trapper to eradicate the beaver than it is to send staff out every day to clean a beaver dam. But you have to work with the ratepayers and the residents. And I did reach out through one of the local residents in the area, property owners, and said, listen, will you give your expertise? If we contact you, will you show us what's going on? We need as a municipality to keep our infrastructure open. So that was my intent when bringing that up. Is it sounds like we're on the right page. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, moving on. Kemble drainage restoration work and timeline. We've been, to summarize the issue quickly, we obviously needed to do emergency works to create some drainage relief in Kemble. That required us to create or extend a roadside ditch, replacing culverts across the front of people's driveways, and doing significant work in the front yards of their homes in terms of that ditch. It is a fairly raw and unfinished construction site at this point in time. Although the ditch works, it's not pretty. And so now we need to do the prettying bit. We have engaged a contractor we will have engaged by the end of this week a contractor to go in and undertake the landscape restoration work. They will be looking at the head walls of each one of the culverts and addressing those where they are needed, and they will be landscaping the sides of the ditch so that the residents along that section of Kemble Rock Road are able to once again resume enjoyment of their front yards. I think the outstanding piece of work, which I still need to follow up with staff on, is the restoration of driveway aprons, if then where that's needed. And we've got that one in hand as well. So everything is in hand, and we should have staff on site doing that work over the next few weeks.
Councillor Winters.
And thank you again. I appreciate the response, but again, that was my concern was we need to get out of Kemble. We need to restore what we promised those property owners that we would do. I mean, here we're almost mid-June again. We're having the conversation. So I think time is of the essence to get in, get out, make everybody happy, and prove that we did what we said we were going to do. So thank you.
Mr. Lewis, go ahead.
Just in response to Mr. Winter's comments, may put his mind at ease. I did stop and talk to a couple of them a year or two ago when I was driving through and told them what the timeline was.
While I have the opportunity in public session, we will be asking for the support and assistance of the residents along there. Whilst we will be able to do the landscaping, if this spring and summer continues to do what it's doing, we are going to be leaning on the residents' support and help to establish any of the vegetation that we put in along there. So we will be mailing residents, dropping cards to residents, advising them of what we're doing and asking for that support. Still up. Sorry, the list hasn't finished. The Bridges EA study. So I don't know how this one can be a relatively short item, or we can probably expend quite a bit of time on this one. So I will try to keep my comments short and sweet on this one. So we have a number of bridges across the township which are subject to OSIM inspections. That's the Ontario Standard. Oh my heavens, it's gone from my mind. Anyway, it's inspections that somebody else does that tells us how good our infrastructure is. That process basically comes in and looks at our bridges and says, yep, they're good, or no, they're not good, or anywhere in between being not good and good. As a result of that, two bridges in our area are currently closed. The East Churchside Road West Bridge, the Emery Bridge, I believe it is known as, and that one was closed earlier this year. And the Side Road 3 Bridge down in Derby, which was closed at least a year ago, 2 years, going on 3 years. So we have two bridges which currently are closed because of defects that have been identified them. In both instances, the defects are associated to the abutments of the bridge rather than the structure of the bridge. They are undercutting of either the abutments or an erosion or a decrease in the strength of the abutments, causing a concern about the structural stability of the road surface that sits above them. We are in the process of going through trying to identify the full process. So an EA, an environmental assessment, is required in all instances, but there are various different natures of EA that are required. So at the lowest end of the spectrum, an EA can be done relatively quickly, relatively simply, where you are replacing like for like. So you are basically taking away what was there that has failed, and you are putting back in something which is of identical like for like structure. And the EA process at that point is relatively small. We have some permits to get from the Conservation Authority, and we have some studies to do for the Conservation Authority, but it's a relatively slimmed down process. If we wanted to change the nature of those bridges, and so, for example, widen or change the construction technique from a traditional clear span bridge to something like a culvert, that would require a much larger environmental assessment process, which would take significantly longer. So an EA is required in all examples, but the scope of the EA changes significantly depending on the intent of the work that you are attempting to do. The purpose of the EA process is to hold ourselves accountable to making sure that we are responsible to the environment, that we do no damage to the environment, and that we, where we can, improve the environmental situation as far as possible. And that's through undertaking wildlife studies, flora, fauna studies, hydrologic studies, soil studies if needed, and working with the appropriate external agencies to make sure that our footprint is no greater than it is today, as far as is reasonably possible. And the scope, the scale of the EAs is changed depending on how much of a difference, a change and impact you want to make. So at the lowest end, like-for-like replacement has a fairly light EA requirement. We are in the process at this point in time in engaging an engineer to both come up with what the design for the replacement of the Emery Road Bridge would be, and the costs associated to it, and what that EA process would look like. As I say, the initial indications we have is it would be very light and quite quickly done, and we would be bringing back a report to council. We have, at this point in time, received some capital estimates for the construction costs. At the minute, they are significantly more than we had anticipated they would be. The like-for-like replacement of Emery is currently estimated at least $2 million. So we are looking at some fairly steep impacts to the like-for-like replacements. And when I say like-for-like, we're not having to engineer these from the ground up. We're basically buying a shelf off a bridge off the shelf. These are pre-engineered structures that are basically, we just take that engineering report, apply it to our unique circumstances, and then drop the bridge in. So these are fairly quick and easy bridge replacements in the grand scheme of things.
Councillor Shouldice, and then I think Councillor Winters.
Just a quick question here. I had a neighboring homeowner of the Emery Bridge ask me recently, when are you going to be done that bridge? I said, I don't know the answer to that question. And I may be jumping the gun on that, but we don't have the report, but is there any estimate as to when that might be finished?
Through you, Mayor Carlton, to Councillor Shouldice, at this point, I can very confidently say it will not be in 2023. We are aiming for 2024 to be our construction season for that bridge.
Councillor Winters, go ahead.
Thank you, Niall. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I respect your position and what you've had to learn in the last 6 months. But I think if I look back, this EA process was started somewhere in 2020, 2021. So my question and why I wanted to discuss it is, we as council would like an update on where we're at with the EA. And part of the EA is public consultation and what options are available. And I think we owe it to the residents to let them know where we're at today. Is the EA started? What are the options out there? What are the cost estimates? I think that's what I was looking for, is where are we? The previous CAO indicated that the EA had been started and that we were looking for an additional $40,000 for soils. I said that my opinion is we don't need to spend $40,000 on soils investigations until we look at options, estimated costs. So that's when I wanted to bring this up, is we owe it to these residents to say where we're at, how far we come down this road with the EA, and let's have a presentation to council so we can make some decisions and move this forward. That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
So I might be able to help. So through you, Madam Mayor, and just for clarity of the audience, it's 4 weeks. 4 weeks. 4 weeks for bridges. I think it is fair to say there may have been some I think it is fair to say that the EA process is not at an advanced stage in either of these two bridges at this point in time.
Have we hired a consultant?
So the scope of, so no would be the answer to that. We have engaged the services of our bridge engineer to provide cost estimates for the bridges. So we have started, but no, the EA process has not started. The EA process for the two bridges which are currently closed, to my understanding, would not require a public consultation process, because it would be at the slim end of that spectrum. It'd be at the gentle touch of the spectrum where we're basically assuming a like-for-like replacement. Certainly, if we got into wanting to widen the bridge deck, widen the approaches, widen the abutments, we're then into a full EA process, which does require public consultation.
Just my concern on both those structures, like for like, is going to be cost prohibitive. There are alternative options out there that would save the municipality money, and I think serve our ratepayers well. But that's why I want to make sure we're, excuse me, aware of the options and where we're headed. Like for like, I think will be cost prohibitive.
So again, through you, Madam Mayor, just to provide some clarity. So we are in the process of obtaining quotes from engineering right now, And one of the pieces that we will be asking them to do is the trade-off between length of time to go through a full EA process and the costs associated with that versus the capital cost of the bridge. So if I take Side Road 3, for example, an open bottomed box culvert in there may well be by far and away the cheapest option, but the length of time it would take to go through the EA process and the costs associated with going through the EA process may actually outweigh the cost benefit of the cheaper capital infrastructure at that point in time. That is a question that we have in front of our engineers to try and resolve. I have another one, I know. Two more? Good heavens alive. The hot seat's getting hotter. Oh, roadside weed spraying. This one is a really easy one. It started. So the notices have gone out. We are a little late in the season, a little later than we would like to be in the season, but it still has significant value. We have attended to giant hogweed all along the rail trail and a number of other spots. So that one has already happened. We will revisit it later on in the year to attend for that. The noxious weed contractor has been engaged. Public notices have gone out. I believe they hit the ground this week. If they don't hit the ground this week, it will be next week. And they will be going to all the usual locations where we've noted this in the past. They will also be attending to all the locations that we have had members of the public phoning in with concerns about.
Councillor Winters.
Thank you. I mean, we spent years as a municipality fighting the wild chervil and tracking it throughout the municipality. And I have noticed the spraying, it is spreading widely. Everybody is losing control over it. So I just want to make sure this was still on the radar. I assume we're partnering with the county pesticide applicator. Has it passed, or we have a private one coming in?
So through you, Mayor Carlton, Councillor Winters, we are privately engaging a weed contractor. It's a weed contractor we've used in the past. We are not partnering with the county on this one. It is a weed contractor we've used in the past. I just can't remember the name of them off the top of my head.
If I may, just trying to, matter of time here, we'll speed this up, but I assume that wild chervil, Phragmites, hogweed along the roadsides have been identified, and that's where we're spraying, or is it just by public complaint?
No, it's the areas we've identified. Just for clarity, Phragmites is not on that list. Phragmites at this point in time is not a noxious weed. It is something I am acutely aware of as an invasive species that we should be looking at as a municipality, but the focus is on noxious weeds. That would be wild chervil and hogweed at this point.
So just a quick question for myself. I had a resident identify some areas the other night. Can residents keep sending that information in through Contact GB, and they'll still be addressed throughout the season?
So you, Mayor Carlton, it would be great if residents could use Contact GB to identify locations where they may have these noxious weed species, and we will check into them. Once we've gone through this season, we probably won't be re-engaging the weed contractor this year, but we will add any locations which are not currently on the program into the program for future years.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Day, go ahead.
Thank you. Question through you, Mayor Carlton, for CAO Lobley. Is Phragmites not a noxious weed just in Georgian Bluffs, or is it not a noxious weed provincially? And if it's not, and it's just Georgian Bluffs, is it one that we should designate as a noxious weed?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Carlton. So Phragmites isn't currently on the noxious weed list. Phragmites is a terrible invasive species, without a shadow of a doubt, and has significant biodiversity impacts, but it is not a noxious weed at this time. The noxious weed list, there's about 30 species of noxious weed present in aquatic and terrestrial environments, which are specifically identified. Generally speaking, the the reason a noxious weed becomes a noxious weed is because of its impact to agricultural land uses. And so that's where what classes something as a noxious weed, or it has a human health impact. Phragmites is an invasive species, which we definitely want to be aware of, but doesn't actually make it onto the noxious weed list.
And that's a provincial list?
That's a provincial list. I can double check that, but I'm fairly certain that it's not on the provincial. Here we go. It's not on the list. There's 25 species on the list, and it's not one of them.
Well, that would be a good change for the provincial government to make, but not one that we can control right now.
Thank you.
In a
Councillor-
super short-term sense.
Councillor Coburn.
Just quickly, Niall, and I apologize if this is putting you on the spot, but in terms of wild chervil, of course we're losing ground on that because it's in farm fields and it's in private property. And so that's a bit of a losing battle. Are you aware of any municipalities that have taken the step to try to enforce control of that on private property, such as farms?
So through you, Madam Mayor, I'm quite happy to pass the buck on this one. That is a county responsibility. The county has a weed inspector who has the right to enter onto property and enforce actions on it. I will catch up with the county and understand how and if they have followed through on that. I am aware that that is something which is done by weed inspectors routinely, though. And so in other municipalities in which I have worked alongside, it is not uncommon for complaints made to the weed inspector to be followed through on and orders given to private property owners to control noxious weeds. Key among them is obviously giant hogweed. Giant hogweed has a very, very significant human health impact, and so is one that is not messed around with. But I can definitely reach out to the county and see how active they are in private property.
I would actually really appreciate that. I have heard from not a great number of folks in the community, but a certain number at least, who would like to see more being done in terms of the control of wild chervil. Thank you.
Councillor Winters.
Sorry, just keep it moving because I think it's a great conversation tonight. When wild chervil first hit the list, the only product out there was called Truvis, and it had a lot of adverse effects. It was very harsh on the environment. There are alternatives out there now, and I'd like to see the township and the county work together where we get that message out to the property owners that have issues. There are alternative products out there now that have been approved on the label, not as harmful as what the Truvis was. Truvis wasn't a great one if you were thinking about some sort of crop for food source, but there are other options out there now. I was at a presentation a while ago with Bruce County, and they've taken quite a lead in it. So, thank you.
Again, through you, Madam Mayor, in the 30 years I've been doing this, we used to be able to use some very effective chemicals. We are significantly hampered in what we can use now, and in fact, most homeowners and indeed probably most farmers have access to far more effective product than we are able to use on public property nowadays.
Councillor Scholz, did you have comments?
Just really quickly, when I think of giant hogweed, I think of unfortunately Shallow Lake and the rail trail. I don't know if you guys have been through the rail trail, but it's awful. Or even close to the old Ball Diamond, it's just scary up there. Anyways, I love Shallow Lake, but yeah, the giant hogweed sucks.
Yeah, there are some private properties that have giant hogweed on through Shallow Lake. As I say, we monitor closely giant hogweed through there. We jumped on it fairly early in the spring to try and get the first growth. I worked with the University of Guelph in a former career on a long-term monitoring plot looking at treatment options for giant hogweed. They tried a variety of different mechanisms. The challenge with giant hogweed is there are so many seeds, and the seeds last for up to a decade, and the structure of that plant is rhizome based, so all the growth is actually underneath the ground. Continual spraying for a decade in an established patch has had negligible impact, and so it is something that is a long-term commitment. And if a landowner is listening that has an individual plant, get on that quick, because once it becomes established, or if you're on a water course with a seed upstream, it's going to be a long-term battle to try and deal with giant hogweed. Yeah.
I think I had actually read somewhere where the seed for giant hogweed is viable for 15 years.
It's an insanely difficult plant to get rid of. Okay, and I think that brings us to item number 6 on the list, which is unopened and unmaintained roads. So the township has a network of approximately 440 kilometers of maintained roadway, which is made up of around 320 kilometers of paved roadway, and the balance 118 or so made up of unpaved roadway. Beyond the maintained network, there is a network of what is currently classed as seasonally maintained roads. Seasonally maintained roads vary from a road which, as the name describes, is seasonally maintained and will have a grader go down it perhaps once or twice a year, may have material brought in every once in a while, to seasonally maintained roads where not a lot is done on not a very frequent basis. Whether it is a maintained road or a seasonally maintained road, they are roadways and as such function as roadways, regardless of the levels of maintenance that are undertaken on them. The township signs where seasonal maintenance is and isn't undertaken, or rather not where it is taken. They sign where it's not undertaken. That's the core network. Beyond the core network, there is the network of unopened road allowances that run all over the township. And there are far more unopened road allowances than there are open road allowances. So we have a fairly dense network of unopened road allowances that were formed by Crown Survey, which have never been constructed or opened or indeed closed by bylaw. There are a small number of those unopened road allowances which have been closed by bylaw, and there are a small number of roads which have been opened as roads and then either amended or closed by bylaw by the township. There are also, as we are increasingly discovering, or I'm increasingly discovering, there are roadways which have been previously maintained as roadways and that we have reduced, changed, or eliminated maintenance activities on them. We're still trying to identify the total kilometre of those roadways that are in there. Generally speaking, the reasons why we might cease to maintain these roadways in the work that I've been doing over the last few weeks is one of a multitude of reasons, which could be there's no longer residential properties down there, agricultural use has changed, and there's no longer a requirement for that. It could have just been a council decision or a decision, not necessarily always at council level, but it could have just been a decision that was made to cease maintenance of those roadways. There is a body of work that needs to be done. We're in the process of working with the county on a mapping exercise so that we have a very clear idea of the exact nature of where all our roads are and the function that those roads have, both from a legislative perspective and from a maintenance perspective. I would argue that our data on this one is somewhat out of date. So our mapping data is out of date, does need some work being updated, and that work is underway at this point in time.
Thank you. Any further comments, Councillor Winters?
Sorry. And the reason for bringing this up, I mean, during the election, we've all heard from residents and ratepayers about some of these seasonally unmaintained, unassumed roads. We've heard about private road. And it's time, I think, that we collectively as a municipality categorize these roads, look at these roads and decide how we're going to deal with them. I can't stand here and tell you that there were roads that we as a municipality stopped maintaining properly. We walked away from them. There wasn't bylaws with them. And it's time to look at those and say, okay, they exist. How are we going to deal with it? Is there a courtesy maintenance and grading plan that's for some of these roads? What's the process for people wanting these roads to be assumed by the municipality? I think we need to look at that. It's a huge exercise, and the acting CEO and I spent a week ago Monday a 4-hour road tour, and I gave them a little bit of history of the municipality. I think that was kind of an eye-opener. This is not an easy task, but this is something that I think we need to undertake as a municipality and get our handles on it. As a municipality, we issue building permits. We have historically. Now we say to those people, you maintain the road yourself. Good luck. As a municipality, I believe we're liable for that. We didn't tell them how to maintain it. We don't make sure they maintain it. So there's all kinds of things that come into this conversation. It's a big conversation. It's going to be timely, but I think we need to move it forward. So that was my intent for bringing this up.
So through you, Mayor Carleton, to Councillor Winters, I think you're quite you're spot on. There is a body of work that needs to be done on this, and it is not a small body of work. It is a fairly significant body of work to go through this. We're digging back into files of the former townships to try and dig out where bylaws may or may not have been passed. And there is a need for policy to be brought forward to council around what these standards mean. So we have provincial policy guidelines through the municipal minimum maintenance standards, which suggest on various different classes of road what the minimum standards of maintenance are. A large number of our roads, particularly those seasonally maintained roads, fall into class 6, where the province stays largely silent on it. In fact, they stay completely silent on it. And at that point, under a provincial piece of legislation, we don't necessarily need to do anything to those roads. But the reality is there's still residences on those roads. There's still members of community who access those roads on a day-to-day basis, either for business, pleasure, or for accessing their dwelling. And so simply saying provincial standard says we don't need to do anything is not necessarily good enough. And so I think staff are committed to bringing back a comprehensive look at our road network, a comprehensive report on what that road network is, where we've been able to find things, and we may need to revisit some of the bylaws that have been made in the past and catch up on ones where we haven't got them and relook at some of the ones where we may have them. And so there is a big body of work to be done on this. And if I may, there was a second point you mentioned there, which I didn't actually touch on in the introduction, which is there are a number of roads in this township which are not built on road allowances. They are built on private property in various different places. The private road in Big Bay is an example of that. Shepherd Road, I was in conversation with a constituent, a member of the public yesterday in regards to Shepherd Road. And that is another example where there is a road which is a clearly travelled road, provides access to properties, and over which in some instances some limited municipal services may actually be being provided in terms of garbage collection and so on and so forth. But these roads are on what appears to be, on a blush, private property, and there are a number of them. There are 4 or 5, 6 or 7, maybe even a dozen that are off Grey Road 1 and go down toward the Shoreline Road allowance in various different places. And as I say, there are examples of those on some of the inland bodies of water particularly. And these would have been punched through at some point in time for access to seasonal properties, cottages and so on and so forth, but are increasingly being used to service year-round properties. And so the initial intent of creating those accesses may now be very different. People may be using them for very different purposes. So I think that these are worth having a second look at as well. Again, to Councillor Coburn's earlier comment, recognising the resource constraints on staff at this particular point in time, I am not going to overpromise in terms of the timelines for bringing some of these back, but I think it's very important that we do start identifying the issues and working through them.
If I could add to that, the roads that I would add to that would be the ones like Kinch's Side Road that have a historic value. They're still being used by farmers to access fields and such, but they're historical, and I'd hate to see us lose that historic value throughout the township. So nice to get those added in and figure out then what we can do to maintain them in some way. There are no further comments on any of that, then I think we can move on to the next item. So seeing nothing, the next item, 16.3. Speed limit reduction on concession 17 between Zion Church Road and Grey Road 17. The recommendation being, whereas a written request by a resident to decrease the speed limit on concession 17 and Lindenwood Road was received, and whereas the physical design of the road, including restricted sight lines and improper lane widths, present community safety concerns best addressed by a speed limit reduction. Now therefore be it resolved that bylaw 2021-089 traffic calming policy be waived to address the safety concerns in a timely manner, and that a bylaw to reduce the speed limit on concession 17 and Lindenwood Road to 60 kilometers per hour be presented for consideration of council. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Schuldeis, Councillor Coburn. Is there any further discussion on this one? Councillor Coburn, go ahead.
So I'm not objecting to this motion in any way. I guess it's just a procedural question. And in full confession here, I did not pull out our bylaw, our traffic calming policy, to know why we would need to waive it. But I suspect it's because we typically follow some kind of study or procedure to determine if a road should be reduced in terms of its speed limit. My question is, are we going to be dealing with these requests as a one-off each time they come forward? Because I do see some problems in that methodology. If we're going to do that in this case, then we're going to have to consider each one based on its merits and perhaps just based on the convincing arguments presented by ratepayers. I guess my concern is we've over the past 5 years I've been on council, we've had these requests come forward and staff has told us, no, we have a process, we have a policy that we follow, we're going to follow the proper methodology. And so we've perhaps turned down some requests like this in the past. And I wonder, I guess with respect to fairness and equity, I would love to hear staff's comments on that and how we proceed going forward.
So through you, Madam Mayor, I can take a crack at this one, Councillor Coburn. So we do have a process. There is a policy. There's a council endorsed policy and process. However, as with any policy and process which is supported and endorsed by council, it's council's choice whether or not they wish to follow it. And so in this instance, as I understand the motion that was before, is to waive following that policy to address what is perceived to be an acute issue. And so at this point, staff wouldn't really have a recommendation one way or another in that. That is a conversation for council. To the wider point around equity, I believe there are a number of roads which are not posted as having a speed limit. And in the instance of not having a posted speed limit under provincial legislation, the speed limit defaults to 80. That is a different approach to the approach that you see in urban municipalities, where an urban municipality can apply a blanket speed limit across its entire jurisdiction, and that speed limit could be lower than the provincial set minimum of 80. So we don't have that ability. So unfortunately, these do need to be addressed on a slightly case-by-case basis. However, I am confident that if there is a list of roads which are currently unlimited or set by the provincial limit, or if there are a list of roads which council and members of community would like to see alternative speed limits on, we can work through that list. It would be a body of work for us to do, but we can work through that list, and we don't necessarily need to deal with them. Although we need to do the work on them on a case-by-case basis, we could, for example, bring back a report on a number of known roads at one point in time with some recommendations which council would be able to address in a singular motion, a singular bylaw at that point in time, rather than constantly having it come back and forth. So I would be very happy to work with members of council and any members of community who may have reached out to councillors or may wish to reach out to the municipality directly to look at a list. Perhaps focusing initially on the ones that don't have a posted speed limit and therefore set at that 80 kilometers an hour limit as a priority, and work through that list. Once I know how long the list is, I'll be able to give some estimate as to how long that might take. But yeah, we can work through that list and follow the process and the policy, but try to do so in a way which doesn't make it feel like you're having to deal with this, week in, week out, month in, month out, and do it in a more collective and collaborative way.
Deputy Mayor Pringle, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Carlton. Yep. So I'm not in favor of reducing it to 60. We're all got our license on the premises that you drive to the conditions that are in front of you anyway, right? So we can put the sign to 60 and people still drive 90 anyway. So the confusing part, or the part that gets me, I guess, we set a precedent to drop this guy to 60, the next week somebody else want to go to 60, and so on and so forth. We have the same issue out here already out at the drive-in road here. We got two different speed limits in a matter of 3 kilometers there. We're up and down, how fast you're going. And you're probably not doing the speed limit anyway. So I 100% understand the taxpayer's concern here. And are we doing everything we can to make his property safe for him to come out? Is there trees that should be trimmed in his tree line or the sight line for him to get onto the road? Is there other things that we could do to make it safer? I guess, and to go from 80 to 60, the people that are driving 80 are still going to drive 80. So whether you put it at 60 or not, so my concern is the president, we said if we do it for this guy, or as a township, are we doing everything we can to make his property safe on our edge, on our side of it, I guess. I'm not saying we're going to trim his lane up and stuff, but because he got the sight line and he needs to get out of his laneway. People, it's a bend, right? It's a corner in the road there. Again, I was taught you drive for the conditions that are in front of you. You're the master of your own control kind of thing. So I really do feel for the taxpayer, but I'm not in favor of going to 60 kilometers an hour.
Councillor Winters, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I mean, historically, I've never been in favor of reducing speed limits. Roads were built to move cars and trucks at a decent rate of speed. When this came up, I actually did go out there for a drive. This road is one that's been missed by the municipality. I mean, the vertical and horizontal sight lines, the road is not 2 lanes width for 2 cars all the way through. It narrows down. And I drive fairly aggressive, don't get me wrong. So when I drove this road, I drove it without paying attention. I kept looking at my speedometer and I struggled to do 60 kilometers an hour. So there is justification on this one. This is not a straight road. This is not, there's 3 or 4 different horizontal bends in it. It is narrow and it should have been posted back when it was paved back in 2000 and service treated back in 2017, 2018. It wasn't. It was one of those roads, I think, that was forced through in kind of an oversight of the municipality. And I think reducing the liability of the municipality, the right thing to do is reduce the speed limit. And I'm not always a proponent of doing it, and I wouldn't recommend it on a road that is constructed with the physical capabilities of supporting that. This one does not.
Mr. Lewis, go ahead.
Single out this road, but a number of the roads have been monitored. Okay, to see, because people complain, right? They complain, cars are going too fast or whatever. Most of the time when we take a look at those and you go and watch pedestrian traffic and other things on those roads, I'll use Old Beach Road for an example. People say that everybody's driving too fast down there. We didn't get one person going speed limit. Things sat there for like almost a week. But you watch people walking 3 abreast up the road. Okay, so when a car goes by you this far away at 30 or 40 kilometers an hour, does it feel like it's too fast? Sure it does, right? And we monitored this road for a week. Most of the cars were doing 60, as you said, they drive to the road conditions, right? There was maybe 4 or 5 that were doing above the speed limit. Other than that, most of them were down around the 60 kilometer already because of the road condition, because Mr. Winter says the road made them drive that speed, right? So, I don't know where I leave you, but it's just some good information to have, right? Like, we get a lot of complaints and we do monitor them, right? And then you go check it out. There's usually some reason why people say they're going too fast. It's not too often. We did find at Shallow Lake that people were going too fast, right? But it's not too often that we find it's absolutely that people are just driving crazy. So.
Yeah, so to Mr. Lewis's point just there, certainly what we saw with the speed device that we put out on the road for a week or so earlier on this year confirms what Mr. Lewis says. There's very, very few people or drivers in a 1 week period that exceeded the 80 kilometers an hour speed limit on that road. It's fair to say, looking at it, that half the drivers are driving at 60 or less. There are a cluster of drivers. There's not many drivers driving over 70. So 70 and beneath is really where 99% of the drivers are driving along that road. And as said, that's driving to the conditions of the road, not necessarily to any sort of posted speed limit that might be on that roadway. Having said that, of course, when we put our camera out there, it's big and it flashes at you and all those sorts of things, and you can see it from a bit of a distance, and we have to put it on stretches of road where we've got space to put it and those sorts of things. So as was alluded to earlier, I might have been just a couple of kilometers an hour over into the red mark on one of the roads we had it out the other week. But you certainly do see that trap coming, and so that might have an impact on speed. But certainly on that road, the majority of drivers are driving at 70 or less.
Any further comments? Councillor Coburn, go ahead.
Do we know of any other complaints that have come in about this particular road other than this one? And have we heard of anyone who's officially not in favor of changing the speed limit here?
So to you, Madam Mayor, Councillor Coburn, I am not aware of a body of complaints, but again, I'm going to reinforce the fact that I've been looking into this issue for a very short period of time and don't have a huge length of service in the township, so I wouldn't hold a huge amount of weight to that observation. On the flip side of the coin, the question you ask, this motion has been publicly available now for a period of some time, and we have had nobody contact us, as far as I'm aware, resistant to the motion.
Okay, thank you. I will now call the vote on this one. All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you. Notices of motion. Does any member have a notice of motion they wish to bring forward at this time? Councillor Coburn, go ahead.
I have two notices of motion. One is a motion regarding short stay accommodation rental business in our township in response to concerns expressed by some residents of the area about septic and water systems there. And the second one is a motion regarding the status of private road in Big Bay, which our CAO alluded to earlier. This is a road that we've been told is private, but I don't think we have a sense, or at least I don't have a sense of what the legal status of that road is. So I would like us to have a discussion about that one so that we can all be on the same page. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? I have an item that's I don't think is really a notice of motion, and we've kind of come across what would support this different times this evening. I would like to see a map of the township put up on that wall. So when somebody says, where is something, we can actually point at the map and see exactly where that road is. So if we can find a way to facilitate that, or if we need a notice of motion, then I would make that. So.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I believe that staff can take that as an interior decorating tip and won't need formal direction on that.
Thank you. Okay, so now closed session. The recommendation that Council of the Township of Georgian Bluffs move into closed session at 7:16 p.m. in the council chambers with the acting CAO, Director of Community Services, acting Director of Corporate Services / Treasurer, acting clerk, and HR manager remaining in the room to discuss. 18.1, advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. Open meeting exemption F of section 239(2) of the Municipal Act 2001. Ongoing litigation with respect to a property dispute. 18.2, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. Open meeting exemption B of section 239(2) of the Municipal Act 2001, acting CAO negotiations. 18.3, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. Open meeting exemption B of section 239(2) of the Municipal Act 2001, staff matter. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Schultes, Councillor Coburn. I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. We are now in closed session. We will wait just a minute. Okay, we are now back in open session. Council for the Township of Georgian Bluffs went into closed session under open meeting exemption F and B of section 239(2) of the Municipal Act 2001. As a result of closed session discussions, 18.1, no action was taken. 18.2, direction was given, and 18.3, no action was taken. We are now on to our confirming bylaw. Recommendation that bylaw number 2023-035, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council on June 7th, 2023, be read a first, second, and third time, finally passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed with the seal of the corporation, and engrossed in the bylaw book. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Sholes, Councillor Coburn. Is there any discussion? I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next regular meeting is Committee of the Whole on next Wednesday, June 14th at 5 p.m. There's no further business. I will now call for adjournment of this meeting. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Winters, Deputy Mayor Pringle. Any discussion? I will call the vote. All in favor? Thank you. We are now adjourned. I'm going to give everyone